They called my cabin aesthetic pollution, said my truck looked like a Home Depot reject. Then they slapped an eviction notice on my door without even knocking. But here's the twist. The clubhouse they hold their meetings in, it's sitting on my land. And the lake they're selling $1 million views of, yeah, I own that too. Karen tried to start a fight, but she built her empire on my shoreline. They taped a notice to my cabin door like it was a foreclosure in a ghost town. No greeting, no knock, just a neon orange sheet screaming 30 days to comply or vacate. The wind peeled at the corner of it like even nature was offended. I stood there with 2 suitcases and a box of my grandfather's fishing lures, barely 10 minutes off the highway from Denver, and suddenly I was the villain of Willow Ridge Lake. The ink was still fresh on my boots, but apparently I was already a community threat. The notice listed unapproved structural materials, aesthetic discordance with lakefront continuity, and my personal favorite, visual inconsistency with community branding. That last one made me laugh out loud, which startled a squirrel on the porch. "Welcome home, Jake." I hadn't even unlocked the door when she arrived. The woman behind it all, clipboard clutched like a warrant, blazer the color of a melted strawberry milkshake, lips pursed so tight they could vacuum seal judgment. "Mr. Morgan, I presume?" she asked without offering her hand. "Elaine Burnett, president of the Willow Ridge Lakefront Homeowners Association." She said it like she expected applause. I nodded cautiously. "Elaine," I repeated, "you're the one who issued this?" I held up the notice. She smiled, thin and polished. "You'll find everything in order. Section 12.4C prohibits vintage log structures with non-numeral finishes from occupying primary visual corridors on the lakefront." "My grandfather built this cabin in 1962, I said. "Exactly," she replied, clicking her pen. "Time for an upgrade or an exit?" The woman turned, heels clicking on the wood like a metronome of menace. She paused at the edge of the porch, eyeing my truck like it had insulted her Prius in a past life. "You'll also need to relocate that vehicle to a concealed area. It violates Article 9.3. Recreational and dated vehicles may not be visible from the main road or water." I nearly choked. "That's my daily driver." Elaine didn't respond. She was already snapping photos of the porch, zooming in on a stack of firewood I hadn't even touched yet. Somewhere in a purse, I imagine, was a tiny gavel and a bottle of Purell labeled non-compliant. I watched her walk away, phone to her ear, gesturing at a bush like it owed her back taxes. Inside, the cabin still smelled like cedar and old stories. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, refracted through lake water ripples on the windows. Grandpa Harold's mug was still in the sink, upside down and chipped from the side he always refused to drink from. I set my bags down and stared at the porch door, the orange notice still waving defiantly. I didn't come here for a fight. I came to breathe again, to find pieces of the man who taught me how to hold a fishing rod and how to stand my ground. But apparently, standing my ground was already on the HOA's hit list. 10 minutes later, a knock came, gentler this time. I opened the door to a woman about my age, warm eyes and windswept curls, wearing a Willow Ridge high sweatshirt and carrying a plate of cookies that looked suspiciously like a peace offering. "Don't mind the clipboard, Queen," she said with a grin. "I'm Abby Dawson. I live in the blue A-frame across the inlet. I used to do water sampling with your grandpa. He was kind of a local legend." I smiled for the first time since arriving. "I think I'm starting to see why." Abby nodded toward the notice. "You're not the first she's tried to push out," she said quietly, "but you might be the first who has a chance to push back." I invited Abby in, and as she stepped over the threshold with the ease of someone who had probably spent more time in this cabin than I had, she glanced around like she was checking on an old friend. "It still smells like Harold," she murmured, smiling softly. I offered her a mug of coffee, black, strong, no cream, just how Grandpa liked it, and we settled into 2 creaky chairs by the window. "So," I asked, gesturing toward the flaming orange eviction notice still sitting on the table, "how long has this HOA of yours been on a power trip?" Abby let out a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, Elaine's reign began about 4 years ago. She moved in with her husband, Clint. You'll love him. He's the kind of guy who wears a Bluetooth earpiece in church. Within 6 months, she rewrote the bylaws, started issuing fines, and declared war on anything that wasn't beige, Bluetooth, or bulldozed." We talked for over an hour. Abby filled me in on the history I hadn't known I was walking into. The Burnetts weren't just HOA royalty. Clint was the developer behind a new luxury neighborhood called Willow Heights. perched up on the ridgeline and advertises panoramic lakefront living for the modern elite. Only problem? The lakefront was mostly owned by Grandpa Harold and now by me. They've been trying to buy up the shoreline for years, Abby said, picking at a cookie. Your grandfather was the last holdout, and his land, it's the crown jewel, the dock, the trail, even part of the clubhouse lot sits on it. I blinked. The clubhouse? She nodded. The HOA headquarters. They think they own it, but the land was only leased, and rumor says that lease expired before Elaine ever unpacked her clipboard. My brain began to race, not with panic, but with the flicker of something colder, sharper, strategy. After Abby left, I wandered through the cabin with new eyes. The place hadn't been touched much since Grandpa passed, but there was order beneath the dust. In his old study, I found a locked filing cabinet, untouched but humming with weight. The key was taped to the underside of the desk drawer, labeled in Harold's all-caps scrawl, just in case they get stupid. Inside was a time capsule of resistance, surveys, land deeds, annotated maps, and correspondence dating back decades. Every dispute, every encroachment, every veiled threat from previous HOA boards, all documented. But the real treasure lay in a thick manila envelope labeled Willow Ridge Boundaries. I pulled out the survey and my jaw tensed. Not only did Grandpa own this cabin and the acres surrounding it, he held title to 60% of the lakefront, including the pier, the trail, and yes, the exact ground under the HOA's beloved community center. I spent the next few hours cross-referencing the maps with a digital GIS app and confirmed what was already itching in my bones. My grandfather had known exactly what was coming, and he'd prepared for it like a man who'd watched too many neighbors cave to pressure and decided his legacy wouldn't drown in bureaucracy. By sunset, I had converted half the living room into a tactical bunker of property rights and topography. I was still standing over the table when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, a text came through. HOA meeting Tuesday night, agenda, property compliance enforcement. Strongly encouraged to attend. No signature. Just a threat in Helvetica. That night, I sat on the porch and stared at the water until it bled into the horizon. Somewhere across the inlet, I saw porch lights flicker in perfect suburban alignment. But here, in the shadow of my grandfather's stubbornness, I felt something else entirely. Resolve, weighty and humming like an underground current. I wasn't just living in a cabin now, I was standing on contested ground. And if Elaine Burnett wanted a compliance battle, she just stepped into the wrong chessboard. What she didn't know, and what I wasn't ready to tell her just yet, was that her precious HOA might already be trespassing. I had the papers, she had the podium, and Tuesday night, we'd see which one held up better under pressure. Tuesday night came wrapped in fog and tension thick enough to cut with a broken rake. Maybe one issued by the HOA, maybe not. I parked my truck just outside the Willow Ridge Community Center, a building that looked less like a clubhouse and more like a vacation rental staged for a real estate shoot. Fake books, oversized succulents, and lighting that tried too hard. Inside, the room buzzed with passive-aggressive energy. There were about 30 people seated in neat rows of folding chairs, most dressed in Patagonia vests or pastel cardigans, each one clutching a copy of the printed agenda like it was a sermon outline. At the front stood Elaine Burnett in full regalia, pencil skirt, lipstick like a stop sign, and her ever-present clipboard, held not like a tool, but like a badge. Beside her sat Clint, pretending not to look bored, and a man I had seen before, thin, balding, with glasses that screamed paralegal who drinks decaf. This, I assumed, was Victor Langley, the HOA's legal counsel. Elaine didn't even look at me as I walked in. She just clicked her remote and launched into a slideshow titled Preserving the Aesthetic Harmony of Willow Ridge. The first few slides were stock photos of homes with manicured lawns and matching shutters. Then came the real show, a grainy photo of my cabin, taken from across the lake, zoomed in just enough to make it look like a haunted forest shack. The crowd tittered. Elaine's voice dropped an octave, the way villains do before issuing ultimatums in Bond movies. This structure, recently occupied by Mr. Morgan, exhibits multiple violations: non-regulation wood siding, an unpainted exterior, visible firewood, and unauthorized vehicle storage. Her laser pointer circled my truck like it was a body at a crime scene. We've offered a detailed list of corrective measures totaling $23,700, 0 cents. We expect compliance within 30 days. I raised my hand. She pretended not to see it. Victor leaned into the mic. Mr. Morgan, while we recognize your property is inherited, exemptions granted to your grandfather do not transfer automatically. You are now subject to the same standards as other homeowners. I stood. With respect, I said, my voice even, this isn't about standards. It's about who gets to decide what belongs here. My grandfather lived in that cabin for nearly 50 years. The natural landscaping prevents runoff. The firewood is stacked to regulation code. And that truck, I gestured toward the screen, is older than half the HOA bylaws you're quoting. Elaine's smile tightened. Sentiment is not a compliance category, Mr. Morgan. This is a community, not a museum. I scanned the room. Some faces were amused, a few nodded. Others looked away, perhaps remembering their own run-ins with Elaine's clipboard crusade. From the back, Abby gave me a subtle thumbs up. Clint leaned over and whispered something to Elaine, who ignored him. Then came the real kicker. Victor adjusted his glasses and said, as outlined in Section 14.2, noncompliance may result in escalating fines, property liens, and if necessary, enforcement through civil court. The words hung in the air like smog. I smiled slightly. That's fascinating, I said, because the parcel your clubhouse is sitting on might not actually be HOA property anymore. So before we talk about liens, maybe we should double check who's trespassing on whom. The room shifted. Elaine's face flickered just for a second, but she recovered quickly, flipping to the next slide with more force than necessary. After the meeting, as chairs scraped and the crowd thinned, a man about my age approached me with the air of someone who'd been waiting to speak for a while. I'm Dan Caldwell, he said in a low voice. I'm on the board. Technically, he glanced around. I didn't vote for the slideshow circus. Just be careful. The Burnetts have plans, big ones. That cabin of yours? It's in the way. He handed me a business card with a number scrawled on the back. If you need help, there are a few of us who don't like where this is going either. I thanked him, pocketed the card, and stepped back into the fog. The night air felt heavier now, like it was watching. And as I unlocked my truck, I noticed something scratched along the side door in jagged, angry letters. Leave. I didn't. I took out my phone and started filming. Because intimidation might work on neighbors, but it doesn't work on landowners, especially ones who have proof. And the next move, that was mine. The next morning, I replayed the footage of the scratch, frame by frame, until the culprit walked straight into the camera's line of sight. Clint Burnett. The man wore a fleece vest, boat shoes, and the smugness of someone who thought community bylaws gave him diplomatic immunity. He checked over both shoulders, then calmly dragged his key across the side of my truck like he was autographing a resignation letter. I sent the footage to Abby, who responded within 2 minutes, add that to the burn pile. I didn't reply. I was already in the study, digging through Grandpa Harold's files with a new kind of urgency. If Clint was willing to commit petty vandalism with his own face on camera, what else were they planning? The answer came faster than expected. Around noon, I heard a diesel engine outside and stepped onto the porch to see a landscaping crew unloading shrubs, identical, uniformly trimmed shrubs, from the back of a Willow Ridge HOA utility truck. What are you doing? I called. The foreman handed me a clipboard. Work order, Community Beautification Initiative, HOA Directive 3.6, Unified Visual Frontage. I stared at him, then at the line of markers they were driving into my soil, my actual deeded property. This isn't HOA land, I said. You're trespassing. He shrugged, clearly not paid enough to care. I pulled out my phone, started filming, and informed them, politely but firmly, that they had 30 seconds to vacate or I'd call the sheriff. They left, muttering, but not before planting 2 shrubs anyway, like botanical middle fingers on my front lawn. The following day, a new notice appeared taped to my door. $500, 0 cents fine for removal of approved landscaping and interference with authorized maintenance. The absurdity was so perfectly choreographed it felt scripted. Over the next week, the violations came daily. My firewood was now a pest attractant, my porch swing a visual obstruction, and the small solar lights along the trail were unapproved electrical features. Each infraction carried a fine between $100, 0 cents, and $750, 0 cents. I hadn't even lived there 2 full weeks and already owed over $3,000, 0 cents, in HOA imagined sins. Abby called it death by bylaw. I called it war. Quiet, boring, relentless war. The kind Grandpa warned me about, the kind where the fight wasn't with fists but folders. That night, I sat on the dock under a moonlit sky, flipping through Grandpa's old topographic maps. My breath fogged the air, but my mind was hot with strategy. One map in particular caught my attention, dated during the drought of '79, with handwritten annotations outlining the lake's receded shoreline. At the bottom, a note in Grandpa's tight script: filed deed with county, shoreline ownership secured. Do not let them develop what was preserved. That was when I remembered the story he once told me as a kid, something about a legal loophole during the drought that allowed him to claim the exposed lake bed. At the time, I thought it was just one of his tall tales. But now, holding that map and that note, it felt like a breadcrumb meant for this exact moment. I woke up before sunrise, dug out the key to Grandpa's old fishing box, and pulled up the floorboard under the porch swing. There, just as he'd said during one of our late-night conversations a decade ago, if you ever need to prove it, check under where the minnows used to live, was a rusted metal lockbox. Inside, wrapped in plastic and still dry after all these years, were the original deeds, county seals, and a flash drive labeled, "For when they try something stupid." I sat on the porch for a long time, dawn burning slowly through the mist, and felt something I hadn't since moving in: control. The Burnetts had money, connections, and a taste for fake boxwoods. But I had land, law, and legacy. What I didn't know yet was how far they were willing to go to bury all three. 3 days after finding Grandpa's lockbox, I placed the survey flags, bright orange and impossible to ignore, along the property line that ran straight through the community dock, the trailhead, and a generous slice of the clubhouse's garden beds. It was like dropping a truth bomb into a country club. By the next morning, someone had pulled half of them out and replaced them with little blue flags labeled HOA boundary correction. No name, no permit, just misplaced confidence and a healthy dose of denial. I replaced them, they removed them again. It became a passive-aggressive flag war, and I was winning because I had the paperwork and the patience. That is, until they escalated from flag games to full-blown propaganda. The HOA newsletter that month featured a 2-page spread titled, "Threats to Our Community: When Legacy Becomes Liability." The article never mentioned me by name, but it included a silhouette of a bearded man standing in front of a cabin with a caption, "Non-compliant structures threaten property values and community harmony." They even added a pulcro from Elaine, "Sometimes preservation becomes obstruction." I laughed so hard I nearly printed T-shirts. But then neighbors started getting HOA advisories warning them not to engage with disruptive residents or accept misleading documents. Abby got one taped to her mailbox. So did Dan, who quietly let me know that HOA meetings were getting more unhinged by the minute. Then came the trees. I came home one afternoon to find a landscaping crew already cutting into the pines that shaded my cabin. They had marked 4 of them as hazardous due to rot, which was interesting considering 2 of them were still blooming and the 3rd had been cored and tested just last year by the Forestry Service. I confronted the crew leader, same guy who'd tried to plant decorative shrubs a week earlier. He handed me a fresh HOA work order and shrugged. "I just cut what they say." I stopped the crew before they took out the 4th tree, but the damage was done. 3 decades-old pines gone in 2 hours. I called Sarah. Her voice was ice. "That's intentional property damage. We filed trespass plus a cease and desist." Then she paused. "And start documenting everything, every truck, every shovel, every finger they point." By then, my camera network had expanded from 2 motion sensors to 6 full HD perimeter cams, including one pointed straight at the clubhouse's back entrance. And that's when I caught, clipboard in hand, looking like a mall cop in loafers, snooping along my trail, muttering to someone on a Bluetooth earpiece. I couldn't hear the full conversation, but the phrase, "He's sitting on it and he knows," came through loud and clear. An hour later, I got another notice on my door. This time, it was a final compliance warning. Either pay $4,680, 0 cents in outstanding fines, or face formal eviction proceedings. I stood there, rereading it under the porch light, the paper shaking slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from restraint, because I wasn't ready to respond. Not yet. Let them pile on the paper, let them think they were winning. What they didn't know, what none of them saw coming, was that the real foundation of their power, their clubhouse, their whole carefully curated illusion, was built on my land. And I had the proof tucked safely in a file labeled HOA War Phase 2. By the time the morning sun burned off the last of the mist, I was in my truck heading straight for the county clerk's office with the lockbox on the passenger seat like it was carrying state secrets. Inside, the place smelled like lemon cleaner and quiet frustration. I met with a records officer named Lila Morse, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who'd worked there since the Reagan administration and didn't have patience for HOA nonsense. When I laid the documents out in front of her, she barely blinked. "Harold Morgan," she said, flipping through the deeds. "Your grandfather made my life hell during the drought years, in a good way." She pulled up a digital copy of the 1979 filing and cross-checked it against my physical copies. All valid, she confirmed. He didn't just buy shoreline, he bought development control. They can't build a floating dock without your okay, let alone a clubhouse. Then she leaned closer and added, "And if I were you, I'd get a lawyer before someone else gets creative with paperwork." Back at the cabin that afternoon, I found creativity had already arrived. My mailbox was hanging open, jammed with a thick envelope from the Willow Ridge HOA. Inside, a formal eviction notice citing failure to comply with community visual standards, non-payment of fines, now totaling $4,680.00, and this one was new, obstruction of neighborhood enhancement operations. I laughed out loud because now it wasn't just bureaucratic harassment, it was a Hail Mary. The document had been signed by Elaine and co-signed by Victor Langley, but what caught my attention was the timestamp, filed the day before I discovered the lake bed documents. Almost like they knew I was about to hit back. That suspicion turned solid that night around 2:00 a.m. when my security camera pinged an alert. I sat up in bed and opened the feed. Two figures in dark clothing, flashlights low, creeping along my property line near the old survey markers I'd placed the week before. Zooming in, I recognized them both, Elaine and Victor. Elaine's hair was unmistakable, even in infrared, tied up in that signature bun like she was ready to attend a hostile murder. Victor was scribbling notes while she pointed at the ground, occasionally kicking at one of the marker flags. I watched, screen glowing in the dark, as she snapped photos with her phone and muttered something that the mic barely picked up. We'll say they were placed illegally. Then they vanished back into the woods like raccoons in Ann Taylor. I sent the footage to Abby, who sent back nothing but a gif of a woman spitting out her wine. "They're unraveling," she texted. "Keep pressing." The next morning, things got bolder. A construction crew showed up again with a city permit in hand. This one claimed they were authorized to begin dock renovations under the HOA's lakefront revitalization plan. I asked to see the permit. Right there under property owner's signature was my name, forged in a handwriting that looked like a drunk raccoon had tried cursive. I took a photo of the document and called the sheriff. Deputy Ross Hart arrived within the hour. He was a tall, quiet man with the calm energy of someone who'd seen enough HOA drama to write a novel. He examined the permit, my ID, the land deeds, the survey lines, and finally, the security footage of Elaine and Victor's moonlight excursion. "This," he said, tapping the forged permit with his pen, "is felony territory if you decide to press charges." I nodded slowly. "I'm not pressing anything yet, but I'm not blinking either," he grunted. "Good, because this thing's about to blow wide open." He paused, then added, "We've had complaints about this HOA before. Nothing stuck. But you," he pointed at the documents in my hand, "you've got nails, not just hammers." And just like that, the game changed. They thought they were cornering me, but all they'd really done was walk into my trap, with flashlights no less. The trap sprung faster than I expected. 2 days after Deputy Hart's visit, I received a certified letter from the Willow Ridge HOA's legal team. It was slick, stuffed in a navy blue envelope, embossed with gold lettering like they were announcing a wedding instead of a lawsuit. Inside, a formal complaint filed in county court demanding immediate enforcement of the eviction and an injunction barring me from interfering with community-managed properties. In other words, they were trying to erase me legally, visibly, permanently. But they'd made one fatal miscalculation. They filed first, which meant discovery was now fair game. And I had receipts, literal ones, notarized, county stamped, and wrapped in plastic since the Carter administration. I handed everything to Sarah Bellamy, my attorney, a woman who had once sued a Colorado ski resort for planting trees on the wrong side of a slope and won. When she finished reviewing the documents, she looked up at me with a slow, satisfied smile. Jake, she said, this isn't just a property dispute. This is the kind of case judges use in lectures. You're sitting on land they've monetized illegally for years, dock rentals, HOA dues, clubhouse events. They've been cashing checks on property they don't own. She flipped through Abby's photos of the dock's construction, the surveillance footage of the midnight survey raid, and the forged permit with my counterfeit signature. We're not just going to defend, we're going to counterpunch. By the time we stepped into the county courthouse, the case had already begun to attract attention. Local news crews circled the parking lot, picking up the scent of HOA blood. Inside the courtroom, one side was stacked, Elaine, Victor, and Clint, each one looking dressed for court like it was a Vogue shoot themed "We definitely didn't commit fraud." Their lawyer opened with a performance so full of vague terms like shared civic harmony and community integrity that the judge visibly blinked. Then it was our turn. Sarah began with the land deeds, presented the expired lease under the clubhouse, dropped the forged signature like a mic, then casually slid in the chemical reports Abbey students had gathered from runoff near the Silver Heights construction, and finally, the cherry on top, a flash drive containing financial records Dave Caldwell had provided, emails showing Clint had been collecting dock rental fees for years and routing them into a private account. This isn't community stewardship, Sarah concluded. This is corporate embezzlement disguised in khaki shorts and monthly newsletter. The room shifted, people leaned forward, a murmur rippled behind us when the environmental reports came up. Abby testified calmly, her credibility reinforced by a stack of biology curriculum binders. Dave followed, reluctant at first, until Sarah asked, "Mr. Caldwell, did you ever vote to authorize legal action against Mr. Morgan?" "No," he said into the mic. Most of us didn't even know they were suing him. The final blow came from Frank Elder, a retired county land surveyor who had once worked alongside Harold. He verified the authenticity of every single document from the 1979 lakebed claim. Harold Morgan didn't just own that shoreline, he said, looking over his glasses. He saved it. Elaine's face didn't move, but the way her left eye twitched every few seconds said plenty. Clint looked like he'd just watched his stock portfolio crash, and Victor, poor Victor, just kept wiping his glasses like they were fogged with guilt. The judge leaned back, hands folded, and said, "Mr. Morgan, based on the evidence presented, I find that your property rights have been repeatedly violated. Furthermore, the HOA has engaged in unauthorized use of your land and submitted forged documents. The injunction is denied, the eviction voided, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for further review." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I said nothing. Let them speculate. Let the HOA newsletter scramble for its next issue. I wasn't interested in revenge as theater. I was interested in permanence. Abby and I stood by my truck, scratch door still intact, camera still rolling, and watched as Elaine climbed into her luxury SUV, expression blank, clipboard clutched like a sinking buoy. "You think she learned anything?" Abby asked. I shrugged. "Probably," I said. Like, don't try to steal a lake from a man who already owns it. But something told me Lane wasn't done. Not entirely. People like her don't quit. They regroup, which meant I still had one move left to make, and I planned to use it before she had the chance. The next morning, before the headlines could even finish making their rounds, I was already on the phone with the new interim county zoning officer. I didn't waste time. I submitted a formal land use declaration reinforcing that all access structures and events involving the northern shoreline, including the dock and clubhouse, would now require explicit written permission from me, the rightful landowner. Within 2 hours, I received an email from the HOA, a request for emergency mediation regarding shared community infrastructure. Translation, they were panicking. I declined the meeting. Instead, I posted a printed notice on the dock post, private property, access by lease only. I didn't need to shut it down. I just needed to remind them Who held the keys now? The fallout spread like algae on a neglected pond. Clint Burnett was quietly removed from the Willow Heights project after his misuse of HOA funds was uncovered. Apparently, investors don't like being lied to about lake access. Victor Langley resigned from the HOA board and reportedly took a leave of absence from his firm. Elaine, however, didn't go quietly. She called a special HOA meeting the following week, claiming she was still acting president until a full vote could be held. Only 10 people showed up. 5 of them walked out before she finished her opening statement. The rest voted unanimously to dissolve the current board and establish a new interim leadership committee. Abby was elected president by a landslide. She sent me a photo that night, Elaine's old clipboard lying in the trash next to an empty bottle of white wine and a torn flyer for Willow Ridge HOA Spring Gala. With the chaos behind us, I finally turned my attention back to the cabin, not as a battleground, but as a home. I installed solar panels discreetly along the roof, replaced a few aging pipes, and restored the old wraparound porch with fresh stain and a lot of patience. The dock, now legally mine in every way that mattered, became the centerpiece of the neighborhood again, but this time under new terms. Abby and I drafted a simple lease with the new HOA board, shared access in exchange for environmental stewardship and zero tolerance for corporate development. We renamed it Morgan Pier, and the sign we hung beneath it read, "Preserved by stubbornness, protected by law." A few of the neighbors even began restoring their own homes with natural landscaping, following Grandpa Harold's lead. The best moment came a year later on a crisp October afternoon. We held a community gathering on the dock. Not a gala, not a fundraiser, just a potluck and a bonfire. Kids fished off the edge like I once did, and old-timers shared stories about how Willow Ridge used to be before it got manicured within an inch of its life. Frank brought a scrapbook of photos from the 70S, and someone played a cassette of Grandpa Harold's old radio interviews about land Abby stood beside me, her hand in mine, and said, "You didn't just keep this place, you realigned it." I looked out over the lake and saw what she meant. The calm didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt earned. Later that night, I rode out into the middle of the lake in Grandpa's restored boat, just as he used to. The stars were loud, the water still. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out one final letter, a note I'd found tucked in an old book weeks ago, but saved for this moment. Grandpa's handwriting, weathered but steady. "If you're reading this, it means they tried, and it means you didn't let them win. It's all I ever hoped for. Keep the water clean, keep the porch light on, and don't let the bastards pave paradise." I smiled, folded the letter, and slipped it back into my coat. Some people inherit money, some inherit land. I inherited a line in the dirt and the responsibility to defend it. That's the kind of wealth no one can evict. And somewhere out there, I'm sure Elaine's moved on to another neighborhood. Rumor has it she's applying to run a HOA board at a retirement golf community in Arizona. God help them. As for Willow Ridge, we're doing just fine without the clipboards. There's a reason they say fences make good neighbors, because some folks will walk right through your front door if you let them. But here's the thing. Boundaries don't just protect land. They protect legacy, memory, and the quiet dignity of standing your ground. Whether it's a lakeside cabin or a front lawn garden, your space matters. And sometimes the most powerful word you can say to people wielding fake authority is a calm, legal no. You don't need to yell, just bring the receipts, the land deeds, and maybe a well-placed trail cam. So if you've ever dealt with a Karen in khakis or an HOA on a power trip, drop a comment below. Let's swap stories, share strategies, and remind each other that compliance doesn't mean surrender. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales where petty power meets immovable property.